Hello there, everybody. Before we get started, I want to let you know that later in the show, I'm going to be talking about a new product that I'm using. It's called Magic Mind, and it is a productivity drink. I'll bet you've never heard anything like this before. It really works, and I'm going to tell you more about it later. But now let's get started.
Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business, write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Cesar Abade.
Learn from the experts, think outside the box, have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Hello, everybody, once again, and welcome. I'm Cesar Abade, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters more than a job, and that your life is a project, and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land that next gig. So join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. And speaking of landing the next gig and jobs and careers, today we're going to talk about hiring and hiring to win. If you have a say on the composition of your team as a project manager, or if you are helping your organization to bring in new project managers or just project team members, you cannot miss this show. Today, I am going to talk to Tatiyana Cure, who wrote the excellent book, Hire to Win. So let me introduce her to you. Tatiyana Cure brings her extensive background as an executive recruiter and talent acquisition leader to her work of coaching managers. She has partnered with thousands of hiring managers in a wide variety of industries. She is passionate about helping managers achieve their business goals through effective talent strategies, meaning bringing in talent into the team. Tatiyana wrote her first book, Hire to Win, a manager's practical guide for attracting and interviewing top talent, to share a blueprint for those looking for a step-by-step guide in hiring. I read the book. It's excellent. I really recommend, especially if you don't have any experience hiring before. This is a great blueprint. So let's welcome Tatiyana to the show. Hello, Tatiyana. How are you?
I'm good, Cesar. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here today and to talk to us about hiring to win.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this is an interesting topic. I've mentioned this topic before. I think I had an episode on specifically on acquiring like a remote team. So it comes up every once in a while because project managers and anybody really dealing with projects, eventually they might have to help or sometimes even be in charge of bringing in talent into the team. So let's start there. How about that? So what are some of the strategies and skill sets that are transferable from project management to hiring?
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely agree that sometimes project managers have to, help hire for their team. Maybe they become hiring managers themselves. But I do think a lot of these strategies are very much transferable. So for example, as a project manager, right, correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably would need to start with understanding what's going on, doing some due diligence and creating a plan, right? So on the recruiting side, I always say to start with a recruiting intake. So it's almost like a project intake, right? Mm-hmm. It's about an hour meeting. And by the way, this is so important because a lot of hiring managers, especially when they're moving so fast and they have such a long to-do list that they're dealing with, they just figure, well, okay, I'm hiring a project manager. Let me go on some LinkedIn and some other job boards and borrow someone else's job description and kind of cobble it together and start moving forward, right? And what ends up happening are a lot of those job descriptions become so vague and so generic that it doesn't really explain to the candidates who may be interested to apply what is actually being asked. So then the manager kind of casts a wide net of candidates, and they have to invest so much time to have these initial screenings just to find out oh my gosh, like none of this makes sense. None of these candidates actually make sense for me, right? Like maybe they're too senior, maybe they're too junior, maybe they don't have the right skill set. But because you put together such a vague job description, that's what happens. You may end up not really describing what that looks like. So starting with an intake and then transferring that information into a real descriptive and authentic job description is so important. And those skills are so transferable, right? And then moving forward of having a plan up front, having, milestones. A lot of times managers have this like unrealistic expectation of, I want a candidate to start yesterday or tomorrow, right? Well, that's not realistic. Or the other thing that might happen is, hiring starts to slip all the way on their to-do list, all the way on the bottom. And then you forget, some candidates lose interest, you lose momentum, right? But if you have a plan and you schedule a time on your calendar once a week to review resumes and so forth, there's a saying, right? Like if it's not on your calendar, it won't happen, right? It doesn't happen. So I think those are real transferable skills of not just following, the gut feeling or following, just the momentum up front, but creating that plan up front is so transferable. And then lastly, I would say is the decision making of having data-based, fact-based decision that you want to move forward instead of, just saying like, hey, I really like that person. They have a really great personality. We can go out and grab a drink together. But now you're kind of saying like, here was my authentic job description. Here are the candidates. Let me make sure that we're making the best well-informed decision. And again, I think a lot of those skill sets are very much transferable from project managers.
Yes, indeed. And I'll build on that a little bit. It's almost like a good job description would be almost the equivalent of a scope of work document in which you define what the project is as much as possible before you start. So you know what to work towards as you're developing and reaching those milestones. And I think this is the same thing. You need to be very clear and specific, and even if folks listening right now, even if they're not the hiring manager, but they're working with the hiring team to bring somebody into their team, it's in your best interest to be very clear, because you're the one who's going to be leading this person in the future. So that makes total sense. And there's a quote from your book here I'd like to read, and then we can talk about that a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So he says this: managers who do not spend enough time hiring the right people hope that with their supervision and training of this new hire, success will be more likely than not. Right. So these managers spend time engaging and developing the new hire, and then they get frustrated when that newly hired employee does not meet their expectations and leaves voluntarily or involuntarily. Can we talk a little bit about that? That's really important.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So what I mean by that, right? Again, if you don't actually take the time with the recruiting intake, some of the questions I like to ask are like, what are the exact challenges that you're looking to solve through this hire? Why should someone want this job? What does a career path may look like for this person? What does success look like in this role in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? So once you start describing that in full detail versus kind of saying like, oh, I just want someone, super smart, super energetic. I want them to be a great team player. And you know what? I'll teach them the technical skills. Or, you start kind of saying, well, I'll just know it when I see it. I don't know what I'm looking for, but when I meet that person, I'll see the fire in their eyes. I'll feel the fire in their belly. I'll know that they're right. I know that they will be okay. Right. So they hope that under their supervision, the person will succeed, but they never really described what the challenge is that they're looking to solve. Or, on the reverse side, right? Maybe they're super technical, But, the role, especially for project managers, right? You need to have, relationships with stakeholders, right? You need to be, you need to be able to communicate some complex issues and break it down for those to understand. So what could happen if you have a really great technical person, but they admit to you, I don't like to talk to people. And you can see that, you can tell right away that, they're having a challenge to describe that very technical issue that they're really good at, but they can't describe it. They can't get people to be bought in on that. So then managers think, okay, well, under my supervision, I'm gonna train them. They're gonna be great, and it will work out. But they're just hoping. They're crossing their fingers, and they're hoping, like, I hope it will work out. But unless you actually explain, what it is that you're looking for to the candidate and ensure mutual fit, not just long term, not hoping for that in a year, 2 years time this will work out, but also short term, because long term may never happen. Think about it, that person may join, and 3 months, 6 months into the job, they're like, this is worse than I thought. Had I known how bad it was going to be, I wouldn't have joined. Well, now you just cost yourself the time to now re-recruit, rehire, retrain. And then, the other person probably left a job that they were content with in hopes that this will be even better. And now they're leaving, and now they have to get another job. So no one wins in that situation. You need to be, and by the way, like, interviewing is very much like a sales, a sales gig. Everyone is selling. The hiring manager is selling the opportunity and the company, and the candidate is selling themselves. But eventually, you'll almost need to look at it as a marriage, even though it doesn't have to be your entire time, right? Until death do us part. But you may want to look at it to say, like, look, like, we're not perfect. Like, put it out there, the good, the bad, the ugly, put it all out there on the table, all the warts, right? And let's make sure that there's a fit here versus, really struggling. And then, a couple of months later deciding, this isn't working. And had I known this, I wouldn't have moved forward anyway. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's, you need to kind of front load because it's, bringing somebody in is work, right? So, and it's always going to be work. And I find that you can invest that time before you sign the dotted line. Or you can do that later after you realize that, it wasn't such a great fit, and now we need to save this relationship. I see that a lot in customer success. I mean, customer success, right? In my day job, and sometimes we bring in a customer that's not the perfect fit, and then we're using heroics to save the account. And I've also seen this with staff, right? We bring somebody in, and we thought it was a good fit, and turns out that they weren't. And then managers and HR and all those involved will spend a lot of time trying to help those folks succeed when maybe that is not going to be, you're not going to see the reward for all that work that you put in. But if you put that work in ahead of hiring, then you can make the decision, right? Like, well, it's not a good fit. So thank you for your time, but no, thank you. Right. And you save yourself that the grief, to have to let somebody go, which is never fun.
Right. There's so much research out there in terms of like the cost of making a bad hire. And that's not to say a bad person, because right. I honestly don't think anyone wakes up every morning and says like, oh, I can't wait to go mess something up at work. Like, I truly believe like everyone wakes up and, tries to do their best. But there's a pot for every lid. And sometimes like you can't fit, it doesn't work. Right. Yep. And that's okay. So there's so much out there that says, the cost of a bad hire. But the one thing that's not talked about so much is like that mental health of that hiring manager, of going through that, because then they end up blaming themselves for making a bad decision. They end up taking way too long to part ways with that person. And then, they take on the burden once they let that person go or part ways with that person, right? They take the burden of that extra workload themselves, or they have to, spread out the work amongst the team, and then the morale dips down. So it's in everyone's best interest to do the work up front, like you said.
Yeah, and I also found that having been in that position where when I'm the manager and there is somebody on the team who is maybe not perfectly suited for that role. What happens that it's unfair for the person as well, because you're putting expectations on someone who can't meet them, not because they're bad, but maybe their strengths are elsewhere, not what we need for this particular job. So it's this constant cycle of letting them down, like you're not meeting the expectations. You're not, and over time they may get the message that, hey, I'm not good enough, when it's not true. They are just good for something else, and
right.
And that job is actually hurting them. When you as a manager, you think you're doing them a favor by helping them and spending all that effort to help them level up, but in fact this is hurting them. So,
yeah.
And if it could have come up if we spent the time and the effort up front. So it's really resonated with me there.
Great.
Now, I'm sure those listening right now have heard of the Great Resignation that's happening right now in times of COVID and post-COVID, and this obviously has an effect on hiring. So, have you seen any changes in the hiring landscape recently, especially related to all the instability in the world right now?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Great Resignation, and a lot of times hiring managers get surprised at how challenging it is to fill their roles. They're hearing about how hot the market is and all about this Great Resignation, but they're not considering what that actually means. Resignation means someone is leaving. That means they left the workforce. They are no longer in the workforce. So the workforce is different, right? And so what we're talking about, those individuals, they left. They may have started their own business. They may decide to be part of the gig economy instead of having a full-time job, or they may decide to be a caregiver and not have a job at all, right? If they're fortunate to do that. So we need to recognize that those individuals are not in the workforce. Now, if we consider the great reassessment, where those in the workforce are reassessing what is actually important to them, and that may not align with what the company or hiring manager is looking for, including potentially working remotely. So a hiring manager may be looking at one job posting and it has, 1,000, 3,000 applicants, and they're looking at theirs and it's just a handful of applicants. And they're getting frustrated, like, what's going on? Where's all this hot market that I'm hearing about, right? But once you see that, you're comparing your job that has a handful of applicants compared to another that has thousands, you may need to reevaluate, well, why is that? Why is that the case? So the landscape has changed, never mind the uncertainty, but candidates have really changed their behavior, right? They're no longer solely looking for just a bigger paycheck. They're considering how the employer aligns with their own values, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as social responsibility initiative, as well as working environment flexibility, including hours and working remotely. Now, they likely wouldn't accept or reject an offer on just one of those factors alone. But when comparing offers, these play more of an important factor than they ever have before. And active candidates who are actively applying to job postings, this is where I go back to say it's really important to have an authentic and real job description versus, something vague and generic that you borrow from someone else. Because active candidates are now really taking the time to read through the job description. They're more likely to apply to roles that are more descriptive, and they know what they're getting themselves into so they don't waste their time, which, by the way, includes compensation expectations. There was a law that just passed in New York recently that you need to list out the job, the compensation expectations on the job description. But again, it's in everyone's interest to do that, because then everyone is not wasting their time. And then lastly, I would say what I have really seen change in the hiring landscape is that there's an expectation of speedy interviews. Now, that doesn't mean to shorten the interviews from 1 hour interviews to half hour, because ultimately the part that gets cut short is the opportunity for candidates to ask questions. And again, this will play a role, especially if they're considering multiple offers or to even stay at their current company. And remember that they're interviewing, they are interviewing companies too, not just allowing the company to interview them. So they need to have all of this information to decide if the employer is in line with what they're looking for. And if they're not, they're kind of, it's like that saying, the beast you know is better than the one you don't know. So they may say, like, you know what, I don't know anything about the company. I'd rather stay at my current company. At least I know this beast.
Okay, let's take a little break from talking about hiring there with Tatiyana, because I want to present to you the latest biohacking tool that I love. It's called Magic Mind, and it has become such a big part of my daily routine. And now they're a sponsor of the show. I want to talk to you about them. It is a productivity drink, not an energy drink. And when I first tried it, I didn't really like it because it has this like herby kind of taste, but it really makes me more productive, and it's hard to describe it. So I take it in the morning. It's just this little 2-ounce bottle. And actually now I actually like the taste and I look forward to it. And it just helps you kind of get in the zone, increase my focus, and it helps me avoid distractions. Like, I'm a big sucker for social media and YouTube and Reddit. And oftentimes waste a lot of time of my day and evening on those websites, and basically wasting my time because I just can't get my monkey brain, right, to kind of settle down and focus. And Magic Mind has done the trick for me. So, like I said, it's the world's first productivity drink. It helps you to put more focus on what you're doing, helps you beat procrastination, helps you be more productive, and kind of helps you get into like a working flow state. If you know what I mean, when you start working on something and the world just kind of goes away and you're able to focus. So, and take it, you drink it, and the effects start to take place at around 30 minutes, at least for me. So if you use it for more than 5 to 10 days, that's when you start to get into more like a long-term effect. So, like I said, how I take it like a shot, just take it, I sip it until it's done. Some people like to take it over a period of time. I just like to take it at once. So I sip it. And it's great. So this was created by a Silicon Valley investor, and if you know anything about these folks, they really spend a lot of time trying different things and different supplements to help them focus so they can build their businesses. And this particular guy founded a bunch of companies and wanted to learn more about the supplements and how they could help. And he was taking all these ingredients one at a time and decided to put it all in one product. And like I said, it works for me. I really recommend it. And there is a limited 20% discount code for the listeners of the Project Management for the Masses podcast. And the way to take advantage of this offer is to go to magicmind.co/PMP. Again, magicmind.co/PMP, and use the code PMP for 20% off your purchase. Again, magicmind.co/PMP, and use the code PMP for 20% off your purchase. I also will have links to this and the code that you can just copy paste on the show notes for today's episode at pmforthemasses.com. Again, magicmind.co/PMP, and use the code PMP for 20% off your first purchase, off your purchase. I don't even think it's just your first. It could be for any purchase. So 20% off your purchase with the code PMP. Thanks, Magic Mind, for supporting the PM for the Masses podcast. And now back to Tatiyana Cure. So much to think about. Yeah, it's so interesting because there is a, at the same time that there is unemployment, the numbers seem to be, I think they seem to be going up worldwide right now. I'm not sure, haven't kept track, but it's just so hard to hire for all the reasons that you have shared so far. So yeah, and I think for a while it maybe it was easier to get folks to be interested in coming to work for you. But now the world, especially after COVID, and a lot of companies moved to like hybrid or distributed workforce, I feel like folks have more options, right? And which means that it's, as the supply demand, right? So if there's more supply of companies trying to get you, then all of a sudden you need to up your game. So you're, describing what your company is all about and describing the role in detail. It makes sense to do that so you can stand out.
Yep.
Cool. Now, I have a question about that, the speedy interviews in a moment. But what are some of the best practices out there for hiring that you don't see companies do very often?
Yeah. So number one, again, I will go back to say the recruiting intake is so important. And this is why I was really excited to be on this podcast, because I feel like project managers can really help talent professionals and managers to really share how important it is to do the work up front. To do the intake, to create a plan, rather than start to cobble a job description from, a couple Google searches, or, pulling in interviewers like, hey, Caesar, can you interview this person? Tatiyana, can you interview this person? Right. And they don't even know what they're really assessing. So really having an interview plan and saying, Caesar, you're going to interview for technical skills. Tatiyana, you're going to interview as a stakeholder. So please assess, communication and partnership skills and so forth. So really making sure that there's a plan rather than having these like super generic interviews. Like, hey, walk me through your resume. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you know about us? Let me tell you how awesome we are. Why do you want to work here? Right. So it's all the same conversation. So really having a really thoughtful interview plan would be great. But then I would also say what I don't see too often is having peer interviews to really understand what does the day in the life actually looks like. It doesn't have to be a test and, a whole list of long questions, but really like, let's have a, peer, person to person conversation, because I'd rather tell you all the good, the bad, and the ugly up front rather than you deciding later on that we're not the right fit, right? Or reverse interview. There's so many times interviewers leave just 5 minutes for the candidates to ask questions. And right, like I go back to say, they're interviewing you as well. They want to know what it's like. So maybe it's setting aside, and again, it doesn't have to be mandatory, but maybe just offering an optional reverse interview would be something that would really make you stand apart. And then lastly, I would say, reference checks, but on the manager, right? Like there's so many references, so many companies that look to do reference checks on the candidates, on the new hire. But what about the actual manager? What about the people who used to report to him or her and no longer are? Could we talk to them? Like, what was it like to work for this manager? I had a general counsel who actually offered the opportunity to someone we were hiring to report to him. And she actually took that opportunity and called his former employees. They have nothing to lose by being, upfront and honest about what it was like to report to him, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Ultimately, she decided to join us, but at least she knew exactly what she was getting herself into.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because it almost sounds counterintuitive to be so specific, right? And to be for lack of a better word, picky. Like we want specifically this type of folks and with this skill set, and narrowing it down that way. But the thing is, at the other end, right, of the the process is the candidate who is looking also at a number of job descriptions, right? Sure, if you narrow your definitions and how you're trying to seek and hire these professionals, you may be narrowing your pool of potential candidates. But if the right candidate is out there, right, and they see their job description, it's going to resonate with them so much that they're going to really want to be a part of the organization. So it's almost like an exercise in marketing in a way, niche marketing. You narrow and be very specific about not only the job description, but how you go about hiring and unpacking what this candidate brings, while at the same time, a person who comes across that job posting and they read, and if they happen to be a good fit, they're going to be attracted to that as well. So that's why I think it's kind of counterintuitive to be more specific, but you get more high quality candidates. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So again, like we were talking about, if you put this really vague job description, on job boards, you will attract a very high number of applicants, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time of doing initial screenings, right? Rather than really investing the time. Maybe you do only get a handful of applicants, but if they're the right applicant, then you just saved yourself so much time, right? So being truthful and authentic and upfront from the beginning, starting with the job description, is going to ultimately save you a whole lot of time. But I would say, look, no one is perfect. No company is perfect. No hiring manager is perfect, and no candidate is perfect. So you just need to make sure that there's an alignment, right? Like if you're saying, I have all of my data points here, and I'm going to make the best well-informed decision. Look, like this candidate may not have, the Excel skills that I'm looking for at this caliber, but they've exhibited their curiosity and desire to learn in addition to being a self-starter. So I truly believe that they're going to be able to, get up to speed as long as I give them specific milestones and knowing how they need to get approached. And by the way, and it's the same from candidates looking for a new company to work for. Like, I don't know anyone who says, my company is perfect. There's nothing I would change about it, right? Like my role is perfect. Like I wake up to sunshine and rainbows every single day. Like that, no, that doesn't happen. But you need to like more than hate about the situation that you're in. And so you're willing to go in and face another day every day, right? So you just need to make sure that it's all aligned in that way.
Cool. So this question is a bit selfish because it applies to my situation. I hope that's okay.
Sure,
but,
of course.
So our company, we have a process in which we do interviews, and then we have a trial period. You mentioned that faster and speedier interviews tend to do better. Do you have any opinions on the future of this approach? I mean, it's been very successful for us, but now the landscape is shifting and changing. Do you see any benefits in maybe shortening this process or changing it to the point of, maybe doing a trial is not going to work going forward as it used to?
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I recognize, faster, you had said that faster interviews are better. Mm-hmm. I would just I would caution to say, yes, like there's an expectation in the market for speediness, but it's not necessarily, that's not to say, okay, well then you need to make decisions fast and, you need to cut down your interview process and you need to change everything. That's not necessarily the case, right? Because if you do that, that if you start cutting things down to, let's say, 2 interviews of just very generic, walk me through your resume, then you're not going to get to the bottom of ensuring mutual fit, both short term and long term. So I just want to put that plug in. You still have to make sure that you assess for technical skills, for soft skills, the importance of, some people say cultural fit. I say, the DNA of the organization, whatever the case may be, but you can't miss anything still. Like you still need to make sure you ensure alignment. Now, in terms of trial, so I'm not sure if you're talking about, kind of temp to perm type of situation, or if you're talking about, the person, actually starts with a company and then there's like a 90-day probationary period. Could you clarify
Sure.
what you mean by that?
Yeah. So what we do is we have one interview, sometimes 2, and then if they pass, right, if we like it, then we offer them a paid trial, and that can last from a couple of weeks to maybe 4 weeks sometimes. And I think we used to do it even longer, maybe five weeks, and we've been shortening it. But so during that time, they get paid as a contractor, basically on an hourly basis.
Right.
And then at the end of the trial, then there's a decision whether to move forward or terminate.
Yeah. So contracting and temp to perm, I will say my personal opinion on that is not to do it. And here's the reason why. You're making your pool of candidates super small, right? Like if someone who is currently full-time employed at another company, there's absolutely no benefit for them to leave their current job to go for a trial for 4 to 5 weeks in hopes that it will work out and that they move forward to a full-time position. If they don't, all of a sudden they're out of work and they have to look for another opportunity, right? So you're really shortening your pool of candidates who are currently only unemployed, or those who have, a certain risk appetite to make those changes, rather than really expanding your pool of candidates to everyone who would be open. But a lot of companies, it has become really popular right now to do kind of contracting or temp to perm, because they've realized, hiring managers and company have realized that they're just not doing a great job in interviewing and assessing candidates through interviews. And so they're saying, well, the only way that we can really just see if they're going to work out is if we bring them on board, give them a paid trial, and then if it works out, then we'll move forward to a full-time job, a full-time offer. Rather than really kind of looking, again, I go back to, well, let's look at an actual recruiting intake. Let's actually see the real challenges that you're looking to solve. If it's technical skills that you're looking to bring to the table, what technical skills are you going to assess, and how? Perhaps, an alternative of sending, a test to the candidate may be a better approach than having them do a trial for 4 weeks. Now, some people are not very good test takers, and I'll admit myself, I'm not a great test taker, right? There's like this pressure that kicks in. But like maybe there's other opportunities, right? Like maybe you have, a specific person designated to have a technical discussion, as well as a case study or take-home test. But you need to kind of really make sure it aligns with what your company is looking to do and what their strategy is. But contractors and temp to perm is not always the best, because if you kind of think about it, the other reason why I'm not really keen on temp to perm hires is the company is very clearly not committing to the candidate or the new hire. So why should they commit to you? Right? So they're going to continue to look for other opportunities. They're going to continue to interview at other companies. So you may be just investing a whole lot of time of bringing a contractor in, disturbing the team, and then leaving very quickly, right? So that's, kind of an impact on team morale. Now, if that's working for the company, then that's great. Like, don't rock the boat if it's not, right? Like, I'm always really big on, metric KPIs and metrics to track to make improvements, because I strongly believe you can't improve something if you don't measure it. But you always have to check to see if what you set in place before is still giving you the outcomes that you were hoping for, versus just hoping that it still works out. So you need to question and hypothesize, like, well, what if I do this? Like, what would be the result? And being willing to try if it makes sense.
That's great.
But if the temp to perm thing is working, even though my personal belief is not to do it, then that's great.
No, this is great. And like you said, there's no perfect company. There's no perfect process either. And I think what I've seen is that for different roles, this works better than others, right? So, and some of the roles, it's not they come in and do the actual job, but we offer them a project to work on and submit, right? And we pay them to do that. So it's not not for every role there's a temp to perm. It's sometimes just, okay, we've had the interview, now we need to test your technical skills. So here's some project and let's see what you come up with, type of thing. But interesting that things continue to change, and expectations from the applicants also change. The commitment part, definitely I've seen that from time to time. So I guess it's good to experiment and change and try different things. Glad you mentioned the data points, KPIs, because what I was thinking here is that if for those listening right now, if you believe that your company needs to change how they are acquiring talent, that change is a project. Okay, so it's not going to be overnight. So you as a project manager can lend your skill set to the organization in that way. And if you see that it's a problem, you can offer, hey, how about we implement a project to revamp how we're doing this? And Tatiyana, in that context, right? So project managers love to measure and track. Maybe they don't love it, but they're trained to do it. So what are some of the data points? Let's say they are trying to improve the process, right? So what are some data points or maybe KPIs that help measure the success of the strategy for acquiring talent within the organization?
Yeah, so the most common recruiting KPIs are things like time to fill, source of hire, applicants per job opening, cost per hire, offer acceptance rate, right? But we have to be careful that we don't continue to track or improve a KPI that doesn't give us the same results that we're hoping for. So for example, if a recruiter notices that time to fill metric is all of a sudden starting to slip, they can try to expedite the interview process, which may lead to the team missing the opportunity to align on mutual fit, both short-term and long-term. So in tracking any metrics and right, so then the person, that's when the regrettable hires are made, when you're trying to, that's an unintentional impact, right? So in tracking any metrics, it's important to ensure it aligns with the business goals and question those metrics frequently, right? Like, does it still make sense that we're still tracking, offer acceptance rate? All of a sudden, it dropped from 100% or 75% to 50%. It's like a flip of a coin, whether or not the person accepts our job. Well, maybe that's okay because you're extending double the amount of offers, knowing that half will decline. Maybe that's okay. So you want to make sure that it aligns with what the goal is of the organization and that you're aligned to those. So you're tracking the metrics that make sense, right? So some of the metrics that I have seen really useful to recruiting strategies, especially including retention of new hires who have been with the company for 2 years or less. And another one is the quality of interviewer, tracking the quality of interview. So how often do we move forward with the candidate that the interviewer said yes to? And how did that person perform? How did that candidate perform once they're hired? How long did they stay? And so those metrics then lead to talent strategies that could make a huge impact. That could include providing training around being a more effective interviewer or making better decisions, right? So you have to make sure that you look at what the data is telling you. If it says like, oh my gosh, our turnover is not that bad, but turnover for new hires is really bad, whatever you determine what that is for your organization, then you need to kind of start narrowing into, well, what does that actually mean? That means we may need to train people on how to interview differently. We may need to look at a different interview approach. We may need to make sure we keep the candidate warm longer, whatever the case may be for your organization. But just to track those really basic, rudimentary, KPIs like time to fill, source of hire, and so forth may not necessarily be the best option.
Amazing. That's great. Yes. And I'm sure project managers and folks in that field listening right now, they understand this. They're nodding their heads, I'm sure, like I am. You need to measure outcomes and not just proxies for other things, right? So, and this is great. So I hope people are taking notes. And for those listening right now, really try to get involved, even if you're not a hiring manager, but you have insights into you as a leader. You have insights into how our employees and the staff in your organization are performing, and this can be very helpful to folks who are doing the hiring. And like I said before, and Tatiyana said as well, you have a specific set of skills. It's really helpful here, especially when it comes to, scoping the work here and helping with the job descriptions and things like that. So, yeah, get involved if you can.
Yes, agree. In fact, I will say one more thing is one of the tools that I use all the time was actually shared to me by a project manager, and I describe it in the book as well, is making a decision when two things are not comparing apples to apples, right? So she actually said, well, let's look at time, value, and impact of each situation and see how much time the hiring manager needs to invest in order to bring this person up to speed. What is the value that the person is bringing to the table that we may not necessarily anticipate or were anticipating, and what's the impact to the business, right? So having a very clear decision matrix or decision tool is really helpful. And I think that project managers absolutely are able to come from a very different lens rather than, HR professionals or talent professionals who are so focused on the people connection, which is just as important. But sometimes having these tools that could be shared by our colleagues from project managers can make all the difference. So yeah, I definitely would ask you to get involved.
Awesome. Tatiyana, thank you so much. So if people want to learn more about you and what you do, where should they go?
Yeah, so check out my book on Amazon. It's available for paperback, ebook, and audiobook. It's called Hire to Win. I also have a lot of tools and resources free on howtowintalent.com, and connect with me on LinkedIn, Tatiyana Cure.
Awesome. Again, the name of the book is Hire to Win, Manager's Practical Guide for Attracting and Interviewing Top Talent. Great read. And I'll have links to the book and Tatiyana's website and all the resources that she shared here with us today on the show notes for today's episode at pmforthemasses.com. And look under the today's episode, and you'll be able to find links to all these things there. Tatiyana, thank you so much again for your time and for writing such a great book.
Cesar, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com